If there's one thing that many modern people find difficult about the Bible, it's this. It's hard to imagine that stories written thousands of years ago have the ability to guide our lives today. And this is certainly true about the accounts of Abraham in the Bible. Abraham himself lived about 4,000 years ago, and the stories about him were written nearly 3,600 years ago. But as followers of Christ, we are committed to the fact that these stories are part of Scripture and therefore are profitable even for modern people. But even with this commitment, the question still remains, how do these stories about Abraham apply to our lives today? How do we bridge that 4,000-year gap separating us from Abraham? We've entitled this series, Father Abraham, because we're exploring the life of Abraham as it appears in the book of Genesis. This lesson is the third of 3 introductory lessons in this series, and we've entitled it, The Life of Abraham, Modern Application. In this lesson, we'll conclude our overview of Abraham's life by concentrating on the proper way to draw modern applications from the chapters in Genesis that speak of Abraham. How should we apply the stories about Abraham to our lives? What kinds of impact are they to have on us today? To understand how the life of Abraham applies to our world, we will look in 2 basic directions. First, the connections that exist between Abraham and Jesus, and second, the connections that exist between the original audience of Israel and the modern audience of the church. Before we look at the modern application of Abraham's life, we should take a moment to review what we've seen in previous lessons. We've learned that the story of Abraham divides into 5 symmetrical steps. First, Abraham's life begins with Abraham's background and early experiences in chapter 11, verse 10 through chapter 12, verse 9. Second, several episodes concentrate on Abraham's earlier interactions with representatives of other peoples in chapter 12, verse 10 through chapter 14, verse 24. The third and central segment focuses on the covenant that God made with Abraham in chapter 15, verse 1 through chapter 17, verse 27. The fourth section turns to Abraham's later interactions with representatives of other peoples in chapter 18, verse 1 through chapter 21, verse 34. And the fifth segment deals with Abraham's progeny and death in chapter 22, verse 1 through chapter 25, verse 18. These 5 sections present the patriarch's life in a symmetrical pattern. The third section, which deals with God's covenant with Abraham, serves as the centerpiece of Abraham's life. The second and fourth sections compare to each other as they both focus on Abraham's interactions with other peoples. And the first and last sections correspond to each other by providing bookends to Abraham's life, tracing his family line from the past and into the future. Beyond the basic structure of Abraham's life, we have also seen in previous lessons that Moses had a purpose in writing Abraham's life. Moses wrote about Abraham to teach Israel why and how they were to leave Egypt behind and to continue toward the conquest of the Promised Land. In other words, by seeing the historical backgrounds of their lives in Abraham, by finding models or examples to follow and reject in Abraham's stories, and by discerning how Abraham's life foreshadowed their own lives, the Israelites following Moses could see the ways they were to pursue God's purpose for them. With this review of previous lessons in mind, we're now ready to turn to the modern application of Abraham's life story. Let's look first at the connections that exist between Abraham and Jesus. Unfortunately, many times Christians apply Abraham's life more or less directly to modern lives. We approach the stories of Abraham as simple moral stories that speak directly to our lives. As Christians, however, we know that our relationship with Abraham is mediated. Abraham's life is relevant for us because we have been joined to Abraham's special seed, Christ. Christ stands between us and Abraham, and for this reason, we must always view the biblical stories about Abraham in the light of Christ and what he has done. To understand the connections between the patriarch and Christ, we'll touch on two issues. On the one hand, we'll explore how the New Testament teaches that Christ is the seed of Abraham. And on the other hand, we'll see how the four major themes we've noticed in the life of Abraham apply to Christ as the seed of Abraham. Let's look first at the concept that Jesus is Abraham's seed.